Welcome to Reformed Thinking. Today we are taking a deep dive into a biblical book that has, I think it's fair to say, caused more than a little confusion and some uncomfortable theological conversations. We're talking about the Book of Ecclesiastes.
That's right. It's often called the black sheep of the Old Testament canon.
And you can see why. It's unflinchingly honest, often sounds cynical, and it's constantly asking these really confronting questions about meaning, about justice on earth, and, what's the actual benefit of just existing.
It's a very sobering book. It's a counterpoint to some of the, let's say, simpler promises of prosperity you might find elsewhere.
So our mission today is to try and cut through some of that confusion. We want to clarify three central elements. First, we need to get into the complex issue of who's actually speaking here. Who is this Qoheleth?
And that's a big one.
Then we have to address the pretty fierce historical controversy that surrounded the book's acceptance into the canon in the first place.
Which is a fascinating story in itself.
And finally, we're going to dissect the three paradoxical themes that give the book its incredible theological structure. The idea of heithal vapor, or absurdity, then the fear of God, and this command to find enjoyment. So you're about to get a shortcut to understanding one of the most intellectually rigorous texts in the Bible.
And that phrase you used, the black sheep, it's completely fitting. I've heard it called the delight of skeptics and the despair of saints.
I can see that.
And it's for that very reason it so readily embraces the dark realities of life. And this tension, it isn't a modern discovery. It goes all the way back to the foundations of rabbinic Judaism.
So even the earliest interpreters were struggling with it.
Oh, absolutely. You can see it clearly in the debates between the schools of Hillel and Shammai, who were the two great rivals in first century Jewish thought. They seriously questioned if Ecclesiastes belonged in Scripture.
And what were their main objections?
They saw what looked like genuine contradictions. For instance, you have Qoheleth celebrating wealth and enjoying your lot as a blessing from God in a passage like chapter 5. But then in other places like chapter 11, he issues these stern warnings against relying on that prosperity. So they're looking at this and thinking, which is it?
And it wasn't just about money, was it? The skeptics also had issues with the tone, the sheer despair of it sometimes.
That was a huge part of it. Take the statement in chapter 4, verse 2, where the teacher says the dead are more fortunate than the living.
And that those who have never been born are best off of all. I mean, that is a stark view of existence.
It's incredibly stark. They also pointed to what seemed like agnosticism about the afterlife. In chapter 3, Qoheleth asks, "Who knows whether the spirit of man goes upward and the spirit of the animal goes down into the earth?"
If you just take that line by itself, it sounds like he's saying we just can't know. A radical uncertainty.
Exactly. Not something you'd expect from an inspired text.
Okay, so those are some weighty objections. It shows that this isn't a new problem for interpreters. But despite all that, and despite some secular scholars today who just label Qoheleth the pessimist, the book was affirmed. It made it into the canon.
It did. The majority consensus among scholars who see this as inspired scripture is that the sayings are, as the narrator says in the epilogue, upright and true. So, for our purposes today, we're pursuing from the conviction that this book is unified and trustworthy. The tension is there by design.
That sets the stage perfectly for our first point. If we want to understand the message, we have to figure out who is speaking and why. The book uses a really interesting literary technique with two distinct voices.
Right, and getting that is key to unlocking the whole thing.
So first we have Qoheleth. The name is often translated as the teacher or the preacher. He's the one on this internal autobiographical quest for meaning. He's the voice of observation, looking at the world under the sun and just reporting what he sees.
And then there's the second voice.
The anonymous narrator. This is the implied author who gives us the literary frame that the central prologue in chapter 1 and the concluding epilogue in chapter 12.
Traditionally, of course, Qoheleth has just been assumed to be King Solomon.
I mean, the text seems to point that way at first glance. It calls him son of David, king in Jerusalem.
And Qoheleth himself claims he had more wisdom than any previous ruler in the city. So the tradition just held that Qoheleth was a kind of nom de plume, a pen name, that Solomon used to give the book authority.
That tradition seems pretty strong, given those clues in the text. But I know that view faces some serious challenges when you really dig into the text. What are the big arguments against it being literally Solomon?
Well, there are about three, and they're all quite compelling. The first is The linguistic dating.
The language itself.
The language itself. The Hebrew in Ecclesiastes is very distinctive. It's not the classical Hebrew of the monarchy, the kind you see in Genesis or Isaiah.
It has a different feel to it.
It really does. It has forms, vocabulary, and sentence structures that are kind of a bridge between that classical Hebrew and the later Mishnaic Hebrew. This points to a post-exilic date for its composition.
So long after Solomon's time.
Centuries after Solomon's reign. Maybe as late as the 3rd century BC.
Okay, so the language is a big clue. What's the second argument?
The second is the internal perspective of the speaker himself. If this was Solomon writing as the current king, some of his observations just don't add up.
Like what?
Well, in chapter 1, verse 12, Qoheleth says, Qoheleth was king over Israel in Jerusalem.
Was, past tense.
Past tense. That's very difficult to reconcile with the life of Solomon. He reigned until he died. He never abdicated as far as any record shows, so if you take that line literally, it's a major problem.
And beyond just that one line, his whole tone often sounds like, well, anything but a king. He's an observer, not a sovereign.
That's a great way to put it. For most of the book, Qoheleth writes like a subject who is watching the injustices of the world unfold. He isn't writing from the high seat of a ruler who could actually fix those things.
Right. He sees corruption and oppression and miscarriages of justice, but he never says, and so I, the king, will put a stop to this.
Never. He just observes it. That's why many scholars believe Qoheleth is an intellectual voice, but not a literal reigning king.
Okay, so if it's not literally Solomon, then who is Qoheleth? The strongest academic case seems to be that he's a fictitious literary creation of the narrator.
And that's the key distinction to make. The anonymous narrator, the one who collected and arranged these sayings, he wasn't trying to pull a fast one on the reader.
He wasn't trying to deceive anyone.
No. He constructed Qoheleth as this ideal, maybe even exaggerated embodiment of wisdom, a figure like Solomon, to conduct this exhaustive search for meaning.
So it's a literary device.
It's a device.
Yeah.
It allowed the narrator to get his inspired wisdom across to his son, the intended audience, by presenting himself as an equal in wisdom to the great King Solomon, but without, outright lying and claiming to be him.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
And it fits into a known literary style from the ancient Near East, what we call fictional royal autobiography.
Exactly. The narrator is using a respected template to structure his philosophical argument. It's a genre of argument, not a historical proof of Solomon's identity.
And clarifying the narrator's integrity here is so critical because it helps explain the book's canonical acceptance. It doesn't matter who Qoheleth was historically, because the narrator's role is what's central.
He's the one who frames the whole quest. He addresses the work to his son, and most critically, he's the one who evaluates Qoheleth's words as upright and true.
That affirmation is the theological linchpin. But wait, you mentioned that its acceptance was questioned. Some people did argue that it all hinged on the belief that Solomon wrote it. How do we square that circle?
Well, you have to look at the broader context of how the canon was formed. If just attributing a book to Solomon was enough to get it in, then other books, like the Wisdom of Solomon, which was popular and definitely attributed to him, would be in the Protestant canon, but they're not.
So a Solomonic byline wasn't a golden ticket.
Not at all. What seems to have secured Ecclesiastes' place was the narrator's final endorsement, that the content, even Qoheleth's painful wrestling with what he saw, was truthful and necessary for a full theological understanding.
This also helps us deal with that other difficult idea, that the book is just two conflicting voices stitched together. The pessimistic Qoheleth versus the orthodox narrator who just tacked on a happy ending.
Right, and that view is really problematic. I mean, it would be absurd for an editor to publish a whole book he fundamentally disagreed with, recommend it to his son, and then certify it as upright and true. It just doesn't make sense.
The simpler explanation is that it's a single, unified work.
The evidence really points that way. It has a unique literary style. It keeps coming back to the same themes over and over, and it uses what scholars call a polar structure. And this structure isn't contradiction, it's tension. It's built that way on purpose.
I want to hang on that phrase, polar structure, because I think that's where a lot of the confusion comes from. If Qoheleth says wisdom is worthless in one chapter, how can he and the narrator turn around and say wisdom is better than folly? How is that not a flat-out contradiction?
It's cohesive because the statements are true from different vantage points. When Qoheleth says wisdom is worthless, he's arguing from that under-the-sun perspective.
The purely observational viewpoint.
Yes. From that view, wisdom offers no abiding, permanent gain. What the text calls yitrôn, against the final reality of death. The wise man and the fool, they die the same death. From that perspective, what did the wisdom gain you in the end?
Nothing permanent.
But then when he argues that wisdom is superior to folly, he's speaking from a functional, practical perspective. Wisdom is better for navigating life right now. It provides a kind of shelter, some foresight, a slight advantage while you are living.
Okay, so both statements are true, just in different contexts.
They're both true. The narrator is affirming the truth of both observations. Wisdom won't save you from death, but it will improve your life. The structure holds that tension intentionally to force us, the readers, toward a theological resolution, not an earthly one.
All right, let's unpack that central theme then, the concept that drives this whole investigation and bookends the entire work. And that, of course, is the word
hebec.
It appears 37 times. It forms the inclusio, it starts the book in 1.2 and ends the main section in 12.8 with the same phrase. Everything is utterly hebec. Most Bibles just translate this as meaningless, but that really flattens it, doesn't it? It misses so much of the nuance.
It misses a ton. You really have to start with the concrete meaning of the word. Hebec literally means a puff of air, a breath, or a vapor.
So it's a physical image.
It's a physical image of something temporary, unsubstantial, fleeting, something that's here one moment and gone the next.
Like your breath on a cold day.
Exactly like that. And we see this so powerfully in Genesis, where it's the name of Adam and Eve's second son, Abel. In Hebrew, his name is Hebec.
And his life is the perfect picture of that idea.
A visceral analogy. His life was cut short, it was fleeting, and it lacked any kind of lasting gain or accomplishment on earth. His very name points to this brief, insubstantial existence.
And the genius of Qoheleth is how he takes that concrete image of vapor and expands it into these two abstract metaphorical meanings that describe human existence. And they fit perfectly with the two halves of the book. The whole book is driven by this question. Can human striving produce any real lasting gain, that word yitrôn?
Right. The search for yitrôn is the motivation for all of Qoheleth's big experiments in the first half of the book.
So let's detail that first half, from chapter 1 through chapter 6. Here, Qoheleth seems to describe life as fleeting and ephemeral. It's a lack of permanence. Qoheleth's main concern is that all his intense work yields no adequate, abiding yitrôn, no lasting profit or compensation.
And he really puts that to the test.
He does. In those famous chapters, 1 and 2, Qoheleth, speaking as this super wise, super wealthy king, sets out on this systematic quest to find that lasting gain. He experiments with pleasure. He says, I granted myself everything my eyes desired and withheld nothing from my heart.
He's testing the absolute limits of human experience. He tests wisdom, he tests wealth, he tests pleasure, he goes all in.
And what's his conclusion after accumulating everything a person could ever want?
In chapter 2, verse 11, he says, When I surveyed all that my hands had done and the toil I had spent in doing it, behold, everything was hebec and a chase after wind, and there was no yitrôn under the sun.
A chase after wind. That phrase just perfectly captures it.
It's the defining phrase for this first half of the book. It gives you that sense of empty, tireless striving. You expend all this energy, you do all the work, but the result is like trying to grab a handful of smoke.
It just dissolves. It's forgotten. The lack of permanence makes any achievement, in the long run, futile.
Right. Then, in the second half of the book, say from chapter 6 to chapter 12, the focus of hebec shifts.
It shifts to its second meaning, enigmatic and absurd. This is about the futility of knowing. So meaninglessness here is less about a lack of permanence and more about intellectual frustration.
Yes, the absurdity is in the gap, the chasm between what we expect from life and the reality we actually experience.
We expect order, logic, consistent justice.
And instead, we get chaos, oppression, and a God whose ways are hidden. Life fails to fit into our neat, rational boxes because we can't fully comprehend what God is doing.
Qoheleth writes in chapter 3 that God has made everything beautiful in its time, but he has also put eternity into man's heart, yet so that he cannot find out what God has done from the beginning to the end.
And that's the core of the frustration. We have this deep-seated craving to understand the divine plan, but that knowledge is fundamentally kept from us.
So Hebec in the second half is about human limitation.
It is. We're frustrated by this huge gap between God's knowledge and our own ignorance. We can't know what's truly good for us in the long term. We can't know what the future holds. And this leads to an intellectual futility, a maddening inability to predict or control our lives.
And the one thing that validates both of these aspects of Hebec, the ephemeral and the absurd, is death. Death is the shadow that hangs over every human activity, making all our striving seem irrelevant.
Death is the great equalizer. It renders everything futile because it strips away all the status and accomplishment we work so hard for. If you spend your life pursuing wisdom and I spend mine pursuing folly, when we both end up as forgotten dust, what actual compensation was gained by your effort?
It mocks our attempts at building a legacy.
It completely mocks it. The distinction between the wise and the fool, which is so central to a book like Proverbs, just dissolves in the grave.
And this is where the discussion gets really serious. Because if the conclusion from our observation under the sun is that everything is vaporous, temporary, and absurd, the book is in danger of just collapsing into nihilism. But it doesn't.
It pulls back from the brink.
It does. And this is where the theological resolution comes in, through those counterbalancing themes of the fear of God and enjoyment.
This is truly the genius of the book, and it speaks so directly to a reformed understanding of God's sovereignty. The whole book is structured to show a fundamental shift in epistemology.
A shift in how we know what's true.
Right, a shift from what we see to what we believe. Qoheleth draws his conclusion of hell from what he can verify with his own eyes and his own experience. That's the under-the-sun worldview.
But his positive statements.
Positive statements about God's goodness, about justice, about the final purpose of life, those don't come from observation. They arise from the heart, from faith. It's a heart epistemology.
So that phrase, under the sun, defines the scope of human experience. It's limited, it's finite, it's observational. And the very repetition of the phrase implies that there must be a reality beyond the observable realm.
A reality above the sun, where
Right.
God operates.
I see.
So if Qoheleth observes that earthly justice fails, that the wicked prosper and the righteous suffer, then the only way to affirm that God is just, which is foundational, is to push that final justice and accountability into a realm beyond our experience.
It necessitates an afterlife and a final judgment.
It has to. If justice isn't fully visible now, it must be inevitable later.
And this framework for a resolution is grounded in that other huge theme, the fear of God. And this isn't some quiet afterthought tacked on at the end. It's a dominant, consistent note that frames the whole book.
It really is. You see it over and over. The crucial ethical section of the book in chapter 5 begins with these powerful admonitions to stand in awe of God. It tells the reader to guard your steps, to listen before you speak, because God is in heaven and you are on earth.
And that awe, that fear of God, is the mechanism that lets us cope with the absurdity, with the heedle.
It is. Fearing God means accepting our intellectual limits. It means submitting to the reality that we cannot solve the puzzle of God's providence. This awe is the only proper human response to a sovereign God whose ways are, for now, hidden from us.
You can even see it in the structure of the end of the book.
For sure. The final summation of earthly futility, that whole allegory of death and decay in chapter 12, it begins with the instruction to remember your Creator in the days of your youth.
And it ends with the affirmation that the Spirit returns to God who gave it.
Right. So the context of creation and accountability is there from the first observation right up to the teacher's last gasp.
And then the narrator, the author who framed this whole exercise, he gives us the final, non-negotiable theological resolution in the epilogue. He states the conclusion of the matter so clearly. Fear God and keep his commandments, for this is the whole duty of man.
That single sentence just confirms that Qoheleth's struggle was not godless. It was an intense theological quest. And the answer to hell is not in our ability to control our lives or to figure out God's schedule. It's in submitting to the sovereign reality of God, whose plan is hidden but perfect.
Now, this affirmation of faith becomes so important when Qoheleth has to grapple with the injustice he sees every day. I mean, he looks at the world and sees wickedness in the place of justice and in the place of righteousness. That's a brutal, honest observation for a righteous person to make.
It is. And this is why his faith is so vital. Because against that contrary empirical evidence, Qoheleth affirms by faith that God is just and that he will bring both the righteous and the wicked to judgment.
He confesses it.
He does. He says, God will judge the righteous and the wicked, for there is a time for every matter and for every deed. This ultimate justice, which happens in a time beyond our grasp, maybe that hidden eternity he talks about, is the only rational hope when earthly justice doesn't seem to work.
So he still has confidence that it will go better for those who fear God.
Yes, he states with conviction that it will go better with God-fearing men because the wicked will not, in the end, escape their fate. The certainty of a future judgment resolves the contradiction of present, observable injustice.
So the meaninglessness found under the sun is overcome by the certainty of judgment found above the sun. And this realization that we can't control the outcome and that justice is deferred leads right into that third great theme, enjoyment. I've heard it said that in this book, meaninglessness becomes the mother of meaning.
That's a great way to think about it.
Because life is short, and because our exhausting work yields no permanent profit, or yitrôn, the only rational response is to embrace the present with gratitude. We have to stop trying to achieve what can't be achieved, permanence, and instead accept what can be received, the fleeting joy of the present moment.
And this is where the wisdom makes a pivot. It shifts from striving for yitrôn to simply accepting one's portion, the finite, temporal gifts God has provided. And this is repeated over and over, almost like a refrain, an antidote to despair.
It's a command, isn't it?
It is a remarkable command, a celebration of the ordinary. Go, eat your food with gladness and drink your wine with a cheerful heart. Enjoy life with the wife whom you love, all the days of this heensel life that God has given you under the sun.
He's basically saying, stop obsessing over what you can't control, the future, justice, death, and start enjoying the simple, finite reality right in front of you.
But this is a crucial area where our reformed understanding is so helpful, because this call to enjoyment is absolutely not an excuse for reckless hedonism, nor is it some kind of human achievement.
You can't will yourself into being happy.
No, you can't. The ability to enjoy life is not a mortal choice or something we can get through our own effort or wealth. It's explicitly a gift of God's grace and goodness, something the sovereign Lord provides.
Qoheleth makes that point very directly.
Very. In chapter 2, he says, "This too, I see, is from the hand of God, for without him, who can eat or find enjoyment?"
And that's a critical distinction,
Yeah.
because if the enjoyment is just a result of my own hard work or my money, then it's still heethal. It's vapor. It'll disappear.
Right.
But if the ability to enjoy is a gift from the Creator, then even the fleeting nature of that enjoyment is sanctified. It's made meaningful.
That is the resolution. The wise person gets that God is the sovereign giver of every single momentary pleasure, and therefore the response isn't self-indulgence. It's gratitude and reverence, guided by the fear of God. That fear of God prevents the enjoyment from just dissolving into recklessness. It anchors the gratitude.
And yet, even in this pursuit of enjoying the present, the reality of death and judgment is never far from Qoheleth's mind.
Never. And he is unflinching about it. He looked at the world and sees that humans share the exact same physical fate as animals. Both stop breathing, both die, both return to dust.
Based purely on observation, under the sun.
The fate of the human spirit seems identical to that of the animal. It's lost to the realm of Sheol, the traditional Old Testament view of the dead as a place of silence and oblivion.
I mean, that's the rawest form of heel, just physical nothingness. But again, his faith breaks through that observation.
It does. His theology is completely consistent with other broader statements of faith you find elsewhere in the Old Testament, like in Daniel chapter 12. The final judgment dictates how you're supposed to live now.
So it's not just eat, drink, and be merry, for tomorrow we die.
Not at all. After Qoheleth advises the youth to enjoy their prime and follow their heart, he immediately adds the crucial caveat that elevates this enjoyment above hedonism. He says, "Follow the ways of your heart and whatever your eyes see, but know that for all these things, God will bring you to judgment."
That one line changes the entire context of life. It turns momentary enjoyment into an act of responsible stewardship.
That's it.
If the enjoyment is a gift, and I'm going to be judged for how I use that gift, then the life I live now has to be characterized by responsibility and adherence to God's standard, even if I can't figure out his grand plan.
That is the heart of the resolution. The confidence that the spirit returns to God who gave it is what allows Qoheleth to live responsibly in the present. He can accept the fleeting nature of this moment because he trusts the abiding reality of the judge. The theological answer is achieved by deferring the final execution of justice and meaning beyond this observable, vaporous world.
So after this whole deep dive, what does it all mean for us? Ecclesiastes is not some gentle book of devotional platitudes. It's an honest, sometimes agonizing spiritual inventory. It starts in a deep skepticism based on what we see, but it ends by celebrating the triumph of faith that comes from the heart.
It uses the harsh reality of death and the frustrating limits of human knowledge to just strip away all our illusions of earthly permanence and self-gain. Qoheleth forces us to see that anything we acquire or build is hemal, it's vapor. But in doing that, he clears the deck, forcing us to rely only on the sovereignty and the goodness of God.
The core lesson seems pretty clear and singular then. The wise person accepts that life is, from one perspective, absurd. It's hemal. Yet at the same time, they embrace the sublime reality of a sovereign, just, and good God whose plan, though hidden, is perfect.
And so we are called to live responsibly in the present, to find deep satisfaction and joy in what is given by God's grace, the simple things, eating, drinking, loving all, while being guided by the fear of a coming judgment. We can't figure it all out, we can't master it, and we definitely can't keep it. But we can accept it as a gift and use it responsibly for the glory of the giver.
So, considering this paradoxical conclusion that meaninglessness, this heḥel, is actually the thing that pushes us toward meaning, because it strips away our false gods, here's a thought for you to consider. How does the biblical certainty of future judgment, which pushes all retribution beyond our observable experience, change the way you appreciate the small, fleeting gifts of God today? That's something to think about as we conclude this deep dive into the Book of Ecclesiastes.